Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Chicken a la King. That's right, nobody really knows how this great American comfort food classic got its name. Some say it was invented and named after a guy named Bill King. Others will say it was actually named after a gentleman named James Keene. But like I said, nobody knows for sure. Which is why I usually go with the story it was named after boxing promoter Don King. And I'm never not surprised at how many people actually believe that. But anyway, this recipe is very delicious, beautiful in appearance, and pretty easy to make as you're about to see. So let's go ahead and get started, and for this, you're going to need like 3 or 4 cups of cooked, cubed up chicken, which is why I'm generally making this with the leftovers after roasting a big chicken. We'll go ahead and eat half, and then save the rest of the meat for this, while of course using the bones to make the stock. It's the perfect system. And I will touch on that strategy in the blog post. But one way or another, we're going to need some cooked chicken and some stock. And then we're also definitely going to need some mushrooms, which I've simply halved and then cut into some nice thick slices. And then we're also going to need some diced bell pepper. I guess you could also use hot pepper or a combination. And then last but not least, we will mince up some shallots or some onion. Up to you. And that is basically going to be it for our main ingredients that you may want to prep ahead of time. And once that's set, we'll head to the stove where we're going to start the cooking process by putting a pan on medium-high heat and adding a little touch of butter. And by the way, in addition to enjoying a delicious recipe, you're also going to learn whether your stove is level. And as you can see, mine is not. Although in fairness, the entire city is not level. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and melt that butter on medium-high heat, at which point we will carefully add in our mushrooms, along with a nice big pinch of salt, and we will give that a stir. And then by now you probably know the mushroom drill. That salt's going to draw out lots of water. So before the mushrooms saute, they're actually going to sort of boil in their own juices. But nothing to be concerned about. As any experienced food wisher knows, eventually that's going to evaporate, and we're just going to be left with butter and mushrooms, which is basically what we have at this stage right here. And what we'll do once those mushrooms dry out and start sauteing is let them cook for about 5 minutes, or until they start to turn a nice light golden brown. At which point we can go ahead and toss in our shallots, or like I said, minced onions, which are pretty much going to work the same. They do say the shallot has a little more complex flavor, but you know what? They say a lot of things, so no problem using the onions. But anyway, we'll go ahead and add our shallots and continue cooking for another few minutes. Which reminds me, I should mention, this is one of those rare recipes where we don't caramelize the mushrooms really dark. I mean, of course you can if you want, but classically speaking, this stuff is generally kept a little on the light side. So I continued sauteing for another 3 or 4 minutes, until my mixture looked a little something like this. And then what we'll do once that's been accomplished is turn our heat down to medium and stir in our flour, which will combine with that butter to form a roux, R-O-U-X, and that of course is what's going to thicken our a la King. So we'll go ahead and stir that in until all those mushrooms are evenly coated, and then we'll basically just cook that on medium for about 5 minutes to take the raw edge off that flour. And yes, I agree that the spatula was a poor choice here. I'm thinking that wooden spatula we have with the hole in it would have worked better. But for whatever reason, I was stubborn and stuck with the spatula. Although maybe it wasn't stubbornness. Maybe it was loyalty. But regardless of your utensil choice, we'll want to cook that for about 5 minutes or so. And above and beyond appearance, one tip you know you're getting close, the flour's going to kind of smell like cooked pie crust. So don't be afraid to use your eyes and your nose. And then once we feel like our flour is fine, we can go ahead and dump in our diced peppers. And we will stir those in and cook those for about a minute. We're not really cooking them so much as we're just coating them with that roux. Okay, so we'll just stir those around for about a minute or so, until we have something that looks like this. And then once that's set, we'll go ahead and introduce our liquids. Or at least 2 out of 3. So we'll start by deglazing the pan with a little bit of sherry wine. Just a splash. And I generally like to let that sizzle for about 30 seconds or so, before adding the next liquid, which will be some nice chicken stock or broth. Preferably homemade, but you do what you gotta do. And we'll go ahead and stir that in. And sure, we all know the old saying, hot roux, cold stock, no lumps. So ideally that stock you add is gonna be chilled, but even if it's not, I still don't think you're gonna have lumps here. Which is great news for you lumpophobes. Seriously, you people have to relax. It's a proven fact that anxiety will actually cause lumps. So if possible, try to cook without any fear. And then what we'll want to do is go ahead and raise our heat to medium-high, because we want to bring this up to a simmer. And of course, because we are working with a roux here, we're not going to be able to tell how thick our mixture is until it starts to bubble. But anyway, to recap, we're going to bring that up to a simmer on medium-high, stirring occasionally. And once it does start to simmer, we will back the heat down to medium-low, and we'll simply let that cook for about 10 to 15 minutes, stirring occasionally, before we move on to final production. And what we'll do at this point while we're waiting is go ahead and add a few of our seasonings. First up, we'll add a little bit of freshly grated nutmeg. Repeat, freshly grated. It's so much better. We will also toss in a little bit of cayenne. That never hurts. As well as some freshly ground black pepper. And I might as well also toss in another pinch of salt, because even though I'm going to adjust that at the end, I know just based on experience I'm going to need a little more here. So we'll go ahead and give that a stir. And like I said, we'll let that simmer for about 10 to 15 minutes on about medium-low, maybe a touch higher. But we don't want this simmering too aggressively. We're basically just giving those vegetables a little time to soften and sweeten up, as well as our mixture is going to reduce a little and thicken up a little more. And I know I'm given the range of 10 to 15 minutes. So how long should you go? You decide. I don't know. That's you cooking. But I let mine go for probably close to 15 minutes. And then once that's simmered for what we think is an appropriate amount of time, we can move on to final production. And all that means is we're going to toss in a little bit of freshly chopped thyme, as well as some Italian parsley. Or if times are tough, you can use regular parsley. We will also at this point dump in our heavy cream, or creme fraiche. We will definitely be given extra credit if you use creme fraiche, and extra credit if you use our recipe for homemade creme fraiche. And then last but not least, we will carefully stir in our chicken, which for me was a little trickier than it should have been because I used such a small pan. I always try to go as small as possible because it's easier to film. But anyway, no big deal. Thanks to my trusty spoonula, I did get it mixed in without making too big of a mess. And then here's the end game. We'll turn our heat down to low, and because it's already cooked, as soon as our chicken is heated through, we are ready to serve. Assuming everything tastes good and it's been seasoned properly. So before this gets anywhere close to one of our guests, we'll go ahead and take a taste. And mine needed a little more salt, which I added and stirred in. And that, my friends, is pretty much it. As soon as your chicken is heated through and you've determined it's been seasoned appropriately, we will go ahead and grab a ladle and serve this up. And right here you can get a good look at my final consistency. Final viscosity. I don't like my chicken a la king too thick, but I don't want it too thin either. So for me this is just about perfect. And we will go ahead and ladle that over some approved carb. And because I'm a little bit of a contrarian, I usually go over mashed potatoes, even though literally every a la king recipe in the world calls for toast, rice, or pasta. They never mention potato. But of course that's up to you. You are the Richard Dreyfuss of what suffices. But I did go close encounters on this thing and served it on a mini mountain of mashed potatoes. And then we'll finish up with a little bit of fresh chive, which I'm going to be snipping this time with scissors in an homage to one of my all-time favorites and huge influence, Nigella Lawson. So I'm going to finish up with some freshly snipped chives. And that's it. Our chicken a la king is done. And believe me, this is every bit as delicious and comforting as it looks. So let me go ahead and grab a fork and dig in. And this really did come out wonderfully. This is just one of those classic old-fashioned recipes that seems to warm me from the inside out. I mean, it's sort of rich and creamy, without being super heavy. I mean, we're not going to run a marathon after eating this. But we could probably do Pleiades. I think. I'm not exactly sure what those are. But anyway, that's it. Chicken a la king. Sure, there's a little bit of slicing and dicing, and it takes a few steps to pull off. But once you experience its warm, comforting embrace, I think you'll agree it's totally worth it. So I really do hope you give this a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.